On Monday, I made a video going over the most surprising player from every NHL team so far this season, so now today we're going to be going over the most disappointing player from every team, and obviously this is all relative to the expectations that I had for these players coming into the season. Your expectations for some of these players may have been completely different, so if you disagree with some of my picks, be sure to let me know what your list would look like down below in the comments. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off like we usually do in alphabetical order with the Anaheim Ducks, and my pick for their most disappointing player is definitely going to be Frank Vatrano. He has been ice cold to start this season, just 2 goals through his first 26 games. His ice time is down almost 5 full minutes per game from where it was at last season. Quite a huge drop off for a guy who had scored 80 goals in his first 3 seasons combined with the Anaheim Ducks, including a career high 37 goals in the 2023-24 season. Obviously hindsight is 2020, but it's definitely looking like Anaheim would have been much better off had they elected to trade Frank Vatrano and cashed in when his value was at an all-time high, as opposed to giving him the extension that they did. Moving on now to the Bruins, and I'm going with Mason Lohrei as their most disappointing player this season. He's still relatively young at just 24 years old, and he's somebody that has all the tools to be a very effective two-way defenseman. He's big, skates well for his size, has good offensive instincts, but up until this point, he really just hasn't been able to put it all together just yet, especially defensively, which actually led to him being a healthy scratch on numerous occasions towards the end of October. He's a player that I expected to have a much bigger impact for the Bruins this season than he has up until this point, but it's pretty clear his game is still a work in progress. Moving on now to the Sabres, I'm going with another defenseman here, and I'm going to say Owen Power has been their most disappointing player so far this season. His ice time per game is down from where it was at throughout the first few seasons of his career. He hasn't registered a point in 9 games. Now let me just say this, I don't think Owen Power has been bad this season by any means. He's still been solid defensively, but he just hasn't been able to take that leap and become a star defenseman for this Sabres team like I'm sure a lot of Sabres fans were hoping he would have by now for a former first overall draft pick and a guy that makes north of $8 million per season. Next up we have the Flames. I was going to go with Dustin Wolf here, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's still a young goaltender. He's only in his second full season in the league. I think he's going to be fine, so I decided to go with Igor Sharangovich as their most disappointing player. His first season with the Flames a few years ago was great. He scored a career high 31 goals, earned himself a nice big contract extension, but since then things have been all downhill. He was a healthy scratch towards the end of last season. Figured maybe that would make him come into this season with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, but this season has arguably been worse than last season. Just 3 goals through his first 24 games. He's already been healthy scratched this season. For a team like the Calgary Flames who struggle offensively, they could really benefit from him getting back to form and getting back to being that 30 goal scorer he was in his first season with the team, but it's really starting to look like that season may have just been a flash in the pan. Moving on now to the Hurricanes, I'm going to go with goaltender Freddie Anderson as their most disappointing player. What is it with Carolina and their goaltenders just never being able to stay healthy? Obviously over the last few seasons, Freddie Anderson has really battled injuries, but this season it's been Kochetkov who has missed a bunch of time, and in his absence, Freddie Anderson really hasn't been great. He's got just 1 win in his last 8 starts. Thankfully for the Hurricanes, 27-year-old undrafted goaltender Brandon Bussi, who had never played a regular season NHL game prior to this season, has stepped up and done really well for them in net, as he's won 7 out of his 8 starts and has helped propel Carolina to first place in the Metro Division. Next up we have the Blackhawks, and I'm going to go with Connor Murphy as their most disappointing player. Prior to this season, he had been a very steady two-way top 4 defenseman for the Blackhawks for quite some time, a guy that had consistently put up pretty solid results, playing difficult minutes on some bad Blackhawks teams. However, this season, he has taken on a much smaller role. He's averaging a career low in ice time per game by far. The Blackhawks obviously have a lot of young defensemen, and the majority of those guys have surpassed Connor Murphy on the Blackhawks depth chart. I think that's the biggest reason why he has taken on such a smaller role this season as opposed to just him playing poorly. And I'll say the same thing about this situation that I said about Frank Vatrano and the Ducks. It kind of feels like Chicago would have been better off if they looked to trade Connor Murphy, say, a season or 2 ago when he was still playing in a top 4 role and had a bit of term left on his deal. You have to imagine the return the Blackhawks could have gotten for him then is much better than what it would be now. Moving on now to the Avalanche. Kind of difficult to pick a disappointing player from a team that has just been so dominant, but since I had to pick somebody, I decided to go with Sam Girard. He's obviously missed a bit of time this season with injuries, only appeared in 11 games, and in those 11 games, he hasn't been been great defensively, has the highest expected goals against per 60 minutes of any Avalanche defenseman, but still, it's not like he's been bad overall by any means. The Avalanche really don't have anybody playing bad right now. Next up, we have Columbus, and I'm definitely going with Kent Johnson here. It has been a very up and down career for him so far. Back in the 2022-23 season, he put up 40 points as a rookie and then would take a step back in his sophomore season. And then last season, it looked like he finally took that next step into becoming a legitimate force in the Blue Jackets' top six. Career highs across the board, 24 goals, 57 points in just 68 games. And now this season, he's got just 2 goals and 5 points in 25 games. His ice time per game is way down compared to where it was last season. The inconsistencies from season to season for Kent Johnson so far in his career have been pretty jarring. It feels like it's just been 1 step forward and 2 steps back. It's got to be pretty frustrating for Blue Jackets fans at this point. Moving on now to the Stars, and I'm going to go with Thomas Harley as their most disappointing player. Hasn't been a great start to the season for him. He's got the highest expected goals against per 60 minutes of any Dallas Stars defenseman, as well as the second fewest expected goals for per 60 minutes of any Stars defenseman. Obviously, he's been out a few weeks now with a lower body injury, and it was revealed that he was actually trying to play through that lower body injury for a couple of games, so you have to imagine that definitely played a role in his underwhelming results. Certainly not a player I would worry about whatsoever, just kind of an uncharacteristically slow start to the season for him. Next up, we have the Red Wings, and I'm definitely going with John Gibson here. What a disappointment he has been. Steve Yzerman acquired him in the offseason in hopes that Gibson could come in and bring some stability to the goaltending situation in Detroit, which has been a bit of a revolving door throughout the rebuild. And not only has he not been an upgrade whatsoever on really any of the other goaltenders Detroit has had throughout this rebuild, he's legitimately been one of the worst goaltenders in the entire NHL this season. It's at the point where it's pretty ugly, and I'm not sure what they're going to do at this point because you can't start a 38-year-old Cam Talbot every game. If Gibson isn't able to turn it around, I feel like sooner rather than later it may be time to give Sebastian Cossa a look in the NHL, as he has been completely dominant down in the American Hockey League this season. Moving on now to the Oilers, I'm definitely going to go with Trent Frederick here as their most disappointing player. Outside of physicality, he hasn't really brought a whole lot to the table this season for the Oilers. His offense has completely dried up, just 2 goals through 27 games. Those are his only 2 points, and his defensive game continues to decline from where it was at a few seasons ago. Obviously, there is still tons of time to turn things around, but that 8-year extension the Oilers gave him in the offseason is already looking like it's not going to age very well. Moving on now to the Panthers, I'm going with Bob as their most disappointing player. Even in the absence of Barkov and Tkachuk, despite where Florida's at in the standings right now, they've played pretty well this season. At 5-on-5, they're top 10 in both expected goals for per 60 minutes and expected goals against per 60 minutes. Largely, it has just been special teams and goaltending that have let them down up until this point. We know that Sergei Bobrovsky is capable of flipping that switch and turning it on when he needs to. We have seen him do it in the playoffs numerous times throughout his career, but this season it's looking like he may have to flip that switch a bit earlier than usual if he wants to even have a chance at playing in the playoffs in 2026. Moving on now to the Kings, I'm going with Kuzmenko here as their most disappointing player. In the offseason, when they signed him to that 1-year extension, it was one of my favorite signings of the entire offseason because of how good of a fit Kuzmenko was with the LA Kings towards the end of last season and in the playoffs after coming over in that trade with the Flyers. He was playing on their first line. He was also on the top power play unit. As a whole, Kuzmenko was thriving in LA, but this season that has not been the case. Just 3 goals so far for Kuzmenko through 23 games. He's been a healthy scratch. His ice time is down. He's no longer playing on the first line. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised by this because inconsistency has kind of been the story of Andrei Kuzmenko's NHL career up until this point, but I really was expecting him to have a big season in LA based on what I saw from him with the Kings last season. Moving on to the Minnesota Wild, I'm actually going to go with Brock Faber here. Do I think he has been bad? No, but he certainly hasn't been the two-way beast that he was in his rookie season. I feel like Faber's kind of suffering from the same thing that Moritz Seider went through for a bit in Detroit, where he burst on the scene, had such a fantastic rookie season, was great in all situations, but then they would ultimately be driven into the ground due to excessive deployment and just playing very difficult minutes, having too much weight on their shoulders. It feels like this season is honestly the first season that Seider has actually gotten back to form and been the same two-way beast that he was as a rookie, and I think the biggest reason for that is because this season Detroit has been using him like a normal number one defenseman, putting him in positions to succeed and not deploying him like a sacrificial lamb. To me, that is exactly what is happening here with Brock Faber in Minnesota. Like, there are very few players in the NHL who have played more minutes than Faber over the last few seasons, and I think it's becoming pretty clear that that has taken a bit of a toll on Brock Faber, and maybe Minnesota should consider lightening his workload a bit. Moving on now to the Canadiens, I'm going with goaltender Sam Montembeault here, who was obviously phenomenal last season and was one of the biggest reasons why the Montreal Canadiens overachieved as much as they did and made the playoffs. Well, this season he has not been able to replicate that at all. He's just 5-6-1 with an .861 save percentage and a negative 4.2 goals saved above expected. And with Jakub Dobeš now coming back down to earth after his ridiculous start to the season, if the Canadiens are going to want to make the playoffs again in 2026, I think it is very important that sooner rather than later Montembeault bounces back and starts to look a lot more like the goaltender we saw him be for this team last season. Moving on now to the Predators, I mean, take your pick. You could go a lot of different ways with this one. Saros, Stamkos, Nick Hague, who was a big offseason addition for them. I decided to go with Jonathan Marchessault, just 5 goals and 8 points for him through 21 games, on pace to finish the season with a career low in points per game. It's looking like it is going to be yet another disastrous season for the Predators, and at this point I think it's probably in Barry Trotz's best interest to just nuke that team, blow it up, trade every veteran that has value, because this core just is not it. Moving on now to the Devils, I'm going to go with Jacob Markstrom as their most disappointing player. Missed a couple of weeks there in the middle of October with a lower body injury, and since returning to the lineup, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. His numbers as a whole on the season don't look great. An .874 save percentage, a negative 5.04 goal saved above expected. Thankfully, his poor play hasn't really hurt the Devils all that much because they have such a solid backup option in Jake Allen, who's been really good for them so far this season. And even if Markstrom is able to turn it around and he goes on a hot streak, I still think it makes the most sense for the Devils to not have, a full-blown starter who gets the bulk of the starts and just kind of keep staggering starts between Allen and Markstrom, because Markstrom is 35 years old. They're going to need him if they want to go on a deep run in the playoffs, so I think it makes sense to keep an eye on his workload during the regular season. Next up, we have the Islanders, and I'm going to go with defenseman Alexander Romanov here. Obviously, his season is likely over. He's going to be out 5 to 6 months as he had to get shoulder surgery after that nasty hit from behind by Rantanen, but in the 15 games he played before that, he was straight up bad for the Islanders. It kind of feels like Romanov has gotten worse every single season he's played with the Islanders so far, and that he kind of peaked in his first season with the team, which is definitely not an inspiring trend for a guy who's in year one of a big 8-year contract. Moving on now to the Rangers, I'm definitely going with JT Miller as their most disappointing player. They made that big trade to acquire him last season from Vancouver, and he produced well for the Rangers after the trade, 35 points in 32 games to end that season. The Rangers would then name JT Miller captain heading into this season, and that is already looking like an iffy decision, as not only has his offensive production fallen off of a cliff, we are already seeing signs of some of the things that happened towards the end of his Canucks tenure. Things like really poor defensive play, just looking disengaged out there and kind of just gliding around. For a guy who was expected to lead this New York Rangers team back into the playoffs in 2026, he has had a very uninspiring first few months of the season. Moving on now to the Senators, I'm definitely going with Linus Ullmark as their most disappointing player. He's had a really slow start to the season, an .876 save percentage and a negative 10.61 goals saved above expected. The only goalie in the NHL this season with a worse goal saved above expected is Jordan Binnington. It really goes to show how good of a team the Senators have, as they're currently second place in the Atlantic Division, despite the fact that their starter, their ace in net, Linus Ullmark, has played so poorly. If he's able to turn things around, then I think the Senators could be one of the most dangerous teams in the East this season, and I don't really think we have any reason to believe that Ullmark won't turn it around, as he's consistently been one of the best goaltenders in the league for years now. Moving on now to the Flyers, I'm going to go with Matvei Michkov as their most disappointing player. Pretty underwhelming totals for him so far through 25 games after leading the Flyers with 26 goals last season and putting up 63 points. He's seen a pretty significant decrease in ice time per game compared to last season and is actually 9th 7th among Flyers forwards in ice time per game this season, which I honestly think is ridiculous because it's not like he's been bad at all. He actually leads all Flyers skaters in 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage. It just kind of feels like maybe Rick Tocchet isn't a huge fan of his game, which isn't a huge surprise, I guess. I feel like this really hasn't been a huge story early on this season because the Flyers are winning games, but as soon as they start to lose, which I think is going to happen, I don't think they're going to remain in the playoff on all season long, then I think we're going to start to hear more and more people complaining about Matvei Michkov's ice time and his usage under Rick Tocchet. Next up, we have the Penguins. Kind of hard to pick a disappointing player from a team that as a whole is really overachieving. I decided to go with Tommy Novak. I thought this season, in his first full season with the Penguins, maybe we would see him get back to playing at the level he played at with the Predators a couple of seasons ago, where for a few years he was in that 15 to 20 goal, 40-ish point range, but it doesn't look like he's going to be able to reach that level of production this season for the Penguins. However, he's still been a really useful middle six forward for them. Moving on now to the Sharks, I'm going to go with Jeff Skinner as their most disappointing player. I liked the signing initially, a low-risk move bringing him in on a one-year deal after a really rough season in Edmonton. Figured maybe he'd be able to get back on track playing on a team where there isn't as much pressure, but it hasn't really been a great start to his tenure with the Sharks, just 4 goals in 17 games. His ice time per game is actually lower this season with the Sharks than it was last season with the Oilers. If you're a Sharks fan, I feel like the best you can hope for is that Jeff Skinner goes on a heater leading up to the trade deadline and the Sharks are able to send him to a contender for a mid-round draft pick or something. Moving on now to Seattle, I'm going with Shane Wright here. He was one of my breakout picks heading into the season. I figured he would get an opportunity to play a bit higher in the lineup this season, have a bigger role after a strong season last year where he finished with 19 goals and 44 points, but that certainly hasn't been the case. He's playing the exact same minutes this season and his production is down across the board. I'd love to see Seattle find a way to get their young guys more involved and find more minutes for players like Shane Wright and also Berkeley Catton, instead of throwing a guy like Chandler Stevenson out there for 20 plus minutes a night and having him getting caved in those minutes. But until Seattle starts to lose and fall out of the playoff race, I really don't think that's going to happen. Moving on now to the Blues, I'm definitely going with Pavel Buchnevich as their most disappointing player. Throughout his first 3 seasons with St. Louis, he had consistently been one of the better all-around top 6 wingers in the league. Very effective on both special teams, great defensively, and consistently in that 25 to 30 goal, 65-ish point range. However, last season we saw his defensive play regress quite a bit, and now this season his offensive production is not where you want it to be. Just 3 goals through his first 27 games of the season. For the Blues' sake, I hope he's able to bounce back, and this isn't a sign of what's to come because this season is just year 1 of a 6-year extension he signed with St. Louis that has a cap of $8 million per season. Moving on now to the Lightning, it's got to be Braden Point, right? He is currently out of the lineup with an undisclosed injury, but in the 21 games he's played this season, just 3 goals, 11 points, and the worst 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage of Tampa Bay skaters who have played at least 10 games. Definitely not a player I'd be too concerned about, as he has been one of the best centermen in the NHL for the better part of 7 years now, but it has been pretty jarring seeing a player like Braden Point struggle to the extent that he has to start this season. Next up we have the Leafs, and I'm going with another superstar here, and I'm going to say Austin Matthews has been their most disappointing player. Has he been bad? Absolutely not, but he does look like a far cry from the Austin Matthews that won the Hart Trophy in 2022 and almost scored 70 goals in 2023-24. He's a player that's held to such a high standard. We know he's capable of so much more than what he's doing right now for the Leafs, and especially with Mitch Marner leaving in the offseason, I think Leafs fans were hoping that Matthews would come into this season with a chip on his shoulder and get back to being that MVP caliber player, and he really just hasn't been that so far this season. Next up we have Utah, and I'm going with JJ Peterka as their most disappointing player. It's another example of a guy that definitely hasn't been bad. He's tied for second on the team in goals with 10, but his points per game is down quite a bit compared to where it was at last season. I think the best word to describe his start to the season for Utah would be underwhelming when you think about the huge contract he signed after the trade, and also when you look at how well Josh Doan is doing in Buffalo. Next up we have the Canucks, and I'm definitely going with Kevin Lankinen as their most surprising player. Just 4 wins for him through his first 14 starts of the season, an .883 save percentage and a negative 4.46 goals saved above expected. I understood Vancouver's decision to give Kevin Lankinen the extension they gave him in the offseason because they have a starting goaltender in Thatcher Demko who's just so injury prone, and last season Kevin Lankinen did pretty good in Demko's absence, but this season that has obviously not been the case. Hopefully Demko's ready to come back soon and when he does, he can stand on his head, because I really feel like that's the only hope the Canucks have of salvaging this season if Demko goes on some insane run. But in order to do that, he obviously needs to stay healthy. Next up, we have Vegas, and I'm going to go with Brandon Saad as their most disappointing player. They brought him in as some cheap depth last season after he was bought out by St. Louis. Saad turned out to be a pretty solid fit in Vegas's middle six, so they brought him back this summer on a cheap one-year deal, but this season he's really struggled to produce. Just one goal through his first 25 games of the season, and he's even been a healthy scratch at one point. Next up, we have the Capitals, and I'm going to go with Connor McMichael here. He was one of many players that really broke out and had a career year with the Caps last season. 26 goals, 57 total points in 82 games. However, this season he really hasn't been able to find that same finishing touch. He's got just 4 goals through his first 27 games of the season. Probably not a guy I would worry about all that much, though, if I was a Capitals fan. The goals are going to come. He's not going to shoot 6.9% all season long. He's still generating chances, as he has a higher expected goals for per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 than guys like Ovechkin and Protas. And now finally, finishing up the video with the Winnipeg Jets, and I'm going with Jonathan Toews as their most disappointing player. I said numerous times throughout the offseason that if you're somebody who thinks that Jonathan Toews is going to come in and solve the Jets' second-line center problem, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And apparently the Jets themselves thought that Toews was going to be the one to solve that problem for them, because they have been deploying him as their number 2 center, and it really just hasn't worked out. Toews has not been great, which shouldn't be a big surprise. The guy's 37 years old. He missed 2 full seasons. I'm of the mindset that he could definitely still be a useful player in a more limited role, but the Jets are just asking way too much of him. So that is going to wrap up today's video, going over the most disappointing player from every NHL team so far this season. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so be sure to let me know what your list would look like down below in the comments if you disagree with any of my picks. If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all season long, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.